So let me know where to go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Liberty First Foundation's weekly roundup as we cover all the news that is news, that should be news, and may not be news, but will eventually be news because we get it before everybody else does. Because we're just smart like that. Above me, to my right, your left, maybe, is Michael Voss Vasquez. He's Dragon of the Southern Tier, formerly, and now of the Bronx and all of New York, independent journalist extraordinaire and long-form commentarist for politics. And to my left, maybe you're right, depending on how all this works, is Michael Marshall, co-founder of the Liberty First Foundation, and he is here to help give us a constitutional perspective on most of the current events and how they really don't pertain to the Constitution at all. Well, we will get to that soon, and I am Del Grimm from Grimm use your words. Grimm Liberty on Rumble. Yes. Thank you for joining us this evening. Like, share, subscribe, and help boost the message as we go through a laundry list of different things that have been happening over the course of the last couple of weeks. Not to mention the least of which is the business going on in Colorado that seems to have captured everyone's attention with the Venezuelan gangs. So to start, how about we talk about that real briefly? In Aurora, Colorado, you have Venezuelan gangs that have been making the rounds on Twitter, being captured on camera, taking over an apartment complex, as well as stories of them attempting to get onto school buses with children on them in order to get around town and hijack said buses for transportation.
Wait a minute. Is that separate of the story of the... Because there were two in Southern California, 23 illegal aliens tried to enter onto school buses this week. That was Tuesday and Wednesday of this week.
There was those, and then there was another set in Colorado. Yeah.
Okay. So this week there were 4 cases of illegal aliens trying to commandeer school buses across America with children in them.
Yes.
That should scare people right there, because they may have heard one story and thought it was the other story, but the fact that this is happening and it's happening across the country, that should really highlight the problem for people
at various times throughout the last month, no less. So it's it's not all at once. We're talking, this is an ongoing issue that's coming across the entire nation.
Dal?
Yeah.
You and I had a discussion offline.
Yes.
A few weeks ago. What was that about?
Essentially, we were kind of spitballing about what would be coming based on different trends and what we saw as far as ramifications of failure to save America, to put it bluntly. And I had always figured that the communists would take over and that, they would have their revolution. But Michael Marshall actually had an interesting theory, one that is very plausible and actually is far more likely. And that theory of his is that the cartels who are embedding themselves within our nation will actually be the infrastructure to our own demise. And that's because they are ruthless. They are willing to work together, but not be together. And they have plenty of resources for things that will ensnare people of authority, positions of power, and make it so that it's very hard to dislodge them by the ordinary populace. So that was Marshall's theory, is that the cartels would be the catalyst for the fall of the United States, the balkanization of such.
No. I don't agree with that.
Well, that's fine.
Well, what are we seeing happening this week?
Well, what we're seeing happening this week is a direct result of open border policy. And it's part of the corruption that we've been seeing for quite some time. This is the left. This is the consequence of the left and its failure to have foresight. Oh, we have open borders and everyone can just come in, and don't worry, America is big and we can absorb it all.
You don't think that could lead to cartels getting a foothold in here and literally turning us into another Colombia?
No, absolutely not.
Why not?
we have too many guns and too many different disparate peoples. There is no uniformity here that they can then latch onto to try and coerce people. So all the different groups, different religions, different peoples that are in America all have different temperatures and resistances. Some will fold immediately and many will not. The very best they could do is what they have done, which is take over certain areas, territories. The gangs do run a lot of areas all across the country, usually in urban environments where it's easy to hide, easy to have a lot of people in a very confined space. So it's easy to intimidate people, to use the power of numbers against any one individual. They do that. But once you go beyond that, you're starting to go into government infrastructure. You're going, one, they're not as organized to deal with that kind of organization, that kind of manipulation of a government. They don't build governments. They don't run governments. And running their organization isn't the same because governments run by laws. Gang cartels are generally run by rule of fear, rule of whoever's the most powerful person at that moment, not laws. Anyone can usurp them, and they get usurped on a regular basis. There's constant fighting because of that. You can't run a country that way, and that would then devolve and bring everything into chaos, and they would lose. They lose their customers. They lose their market. They're in the middle of a war. Wars absorb resources. They don't build them. So it's counterproductive to them. Rather than get into all that difficulty, trying to manage people and feed people and keep the infrastructure up. No, rather than do all that, just have the gang. Let someone else handle that stuff, and you handle the illicit goods and services, the crimes, and build your empire underneath all of that, and just take advantage of it and build your resources that way. So no, I don't see cartels destroying America. What I do see is cartels taking advantage of the loopholes and the lack of planning that we are seeing, which is what's happening. That's why
I can actually see cartels taking control because they are ruthless. Okay, and starting to take control of certain politicians and so forth. Starting on local basis and moving their way up as they gain more power.
No, they would do that and do it in Mexico. Do it in, you've got almost all Central and Southern America to do that with. And you could build up your power base there. It's much easier. They're already more corrupt. They're less capable. They're more unified. They're more homogenous in terms of ideology and culture and everything else. It's much easier to do that throughout Central and South America than it is in the United States. And they won't do it there, which is their base. Why would they do it here where it's much, much harder? It's not productive for them. No, the most productive thing they can do, because at the end of the day, the cartels are businesses. Illegal, criminal, violent, but they're businesses. And the best thing for them to do is not to run a country, it's to take advantage of it. It's part of the reason why the Taliban fails so much. They're terrorists. They're religious terrorists. They're good at doing religious terrorist operations. They don't know how to run anything. Their operational capabilities are non-existent. And the people who would be able to do that, to maintain the infrastructure, are the very same people that they kill and they suppress. So they have no reason to do that, which is why Afghanistan is crumbling, why we see Iraq and we see Syria. Many of these Middle Eastern nations are falling apart. Many African nations are falling apart because the people they got too big for their britches. They're terrorists. They think, oh, we'll just convert everyone and everything will fall in place. No, it doesn't work like that. That's not how the real world works. That's their ideology. That's their dream. And then they have to deal with the reality of that's not what keeps an infrastructure or a nation going. And they fall apart. And then they go into civil war and then they lose everything. And someone else takes over. And if they're lucky, from their point of view, they rebuild into that same terrorist underground organization, doing it all over again. which is why the Middle East is in that cycle. Why we see most of Central and Western Africa is in that cycle of constantly doing the same thing over and over. So no. And yeah, they have apartment complexes, they have neighborhoods. Yeah. Not the same thing as running a city, running a country, running a state. It's not the same.
No, it wouldn't be. But at the same time, the chaos that is created by them taking advantage of the system would definitely give people that are more inclined to running the country an easier time of doing so by making it look like they are saving the populace from the cartel, when in fact they're actually working with them.
There was a movie a while ago, Last Man Standing, from Bruce Willis. And it's based on the old Western trope. It's been done a couple times. It's like it's a remake of For a Few Dollars More, Clint Eastwood. And it's a more modern remake of that same storyline. And in there's a Texas Ranger who is looking at these two gangs fighting in a town. And he at one point says, corruption is part of human nature. There's always going to be some. But two gangs in one town is too much. So there has to be one gang and I'll let it go. But if I come back to this town and I see there's two gangs, then I'm going to take you all out. This is the same nature of what we see when it comes to cartels. When they're they want power bases in cities. But once they go beyond that, they have an upper limit of what they can control. I think our efforts should be, and the easiest way to combat the cartels, the first and foremost thing, follow immigration law. It's that simple. Yeah. Kamala Harris is on stage and Democrats are talking about, we need to pass a law. You didn't pass this law on immigration or that law. We already have immigration laws. It's real simple. Enforce the law as it exists. Work on the law that we have. Close the border. Don't allow illegal aliens in when they are in. Prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. Get them out of the country. Start there. That is our number one defense against the 378 terrorists, known and suspected terrorists, a 3,400% increase in the last 4 years. All we need to do, we start with closing the border and enforcing the laws, and then everything else gets much easier to take care of. Then we can talk about who we're going to let in, whether we change the laws to let this group or that group have more access. Start with, you preserve the law, you enforce the law, you retain control, and then we can talk about whether or not we want to be even more generous than our nation is already immensely generous to a level that no other country is in the world. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And I would also add that the only way that you're going to be able to preserve the law and enforce the law is if you vote appropriately and make sure that you put representatives in that are going to do the job. And so far, we haven't had candidates that are willing. More often,
that kind of leads us into our next topic of Harris's.
Before we move on, because there's a little bit more to this, and I think we should address the fear factor, because what you guys are talking about in bringing this up, and the theory about what cartels could do, it's about fear. It's about the terror that Joe Average feels because no one seems to be, one, enforcing the bloody law that already exists.
Right.
And we have an open border that is allowing the law to continue to be corrupted. And we have sanctuary cities and sanctuary states that are fostering and encouraging this. And that's why,
one of them being Aurora, Colorado.
And we also have the entire state of California. And that's why we now have these illegal immigrants, whether in gangs or otherwise, they're coming up to school buses filled with kids, and they're trying to commandeer them. I don't know if they're trying to hijack the buses. I don't know if they're going to use the kids as kidnapping victims, embezzlement, God forbid, sexual purposes. We have no idea why they were doing it per se. Maybe a little bit more in Aurora. Maybe it's more gang related. Maybe it's more towards kidnapping and extortion. But this is happening across the country because we have the open border, because we have encouraged this corruption and this failure to enforce the laws. Sanctuary cities, sanctuary states have failed. The progressive policies have failed, and we are endangering the next generation of kids. Fear isn't the answer.
No.
Nor is it saying, oh, well, you're just being racist. No, I'm not. I don't care if the gangs are coming from Angola or they're coming from China or they're coming from Ecuador or Venezuela. Doesn't matter. They're all criminals. I'm talking about how do we deal with these criminals? And the answer isn't be afraid of them, which empowers them. It's not to keep the borders open because I'm afraid of being called a racist, which empowers them. The only answer is we enforce the law, because if we don't do that, the next result is going to be individuals protecting themselves and their kids, Second Amendment, and that's where it gets really chaotic. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's within that chaos that there's a lot of fear that it's deliberate on the part of people that are supposed to be leadership in the country.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think any leader is quite that stupid to encourage, to terrify and fearmonger parents to the point that they're going to be walking down with M16s. They're going to be walking down with their rifles and their handguns and bulletproof vests to get their kids on and off a bus. And that will inevitably lead to
Bad
conflicts.
Things. Yeah. Bad things.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that I would disagree and say that they are willing to use that level of fear. I mean, they use it already in order to pursue policy that would otherwise be considered insanity, like the usage of suicide statistics that are actually inaccurate for certain medical procedures that are used on children, and it's used against the parents.
Oh, the gender affirmation movement. Yeah, which is stupid.
So that level of fear mongering is also the same. It's life or death. You either have to choose and have somebody live, or you choose them death. When in reality, recidivism is like 90% if you just leave it alone, and if you don't leave it alone, the likelihood of them actually ending their lives is higher because they.
See, I don't think that's a fair analogy. I get it. Gender affirmation is damaging to the youth. Absolutely. Even if it's just 1%, if they're wrong just 1% of the time, based on the explosion that we have seen in this movement towards gender fluidity and self-mutilation, these children chopping off their genitals, which has increased by something like 10,000% within the last 3 years. Literally, it's that much of an increase. You went from 0.5% of the entire population in the world to 15% of the current generation. That's like 1,000, maybe 10,000% increase. If we're only wrong by 1%, that's tens of thousands of kids who will turn out, many of them will take the option to be like the Tennessee trans shooter. That's what gender affirmation gets you. But that's not the same thing as open borders and allowing criminality and corruption in, and the fear mongering of this gang is trying to take over this neighborhood, this community, and they're using force to do it. It's a different question. You aren't directly killing someone with gender affirmation. You are crushing their life. You are destroying their soul. You are, and when I say crushing their soul, I mean just their willingness to live, not necessarily the religious context, though it can be taken that way. But you're destroying a life, but that's a long-term, slow process, which may have other consequences with it. The gangs are immediate. That's an immediate process.
And as I showed through several news articles that I posted up,
yeah,
this is literally happening all across the country.
Yeah.
There's reports in New York City. There's reports in California. There's reports in Colorado. The Chicago PD's warning of these attacks. I mean, it's literally happening all over.
And
those are just a few of the states that I looked up.
And like Voss was saying, it's mostly in affluent urban areas that are predominantly controlled by Democrats.
Yeah, because they open the doors. They invite them in. And once you do that, it's like, I don't know, you have an infection.
What's the latest in the amount the taxpayers are paying right now for illegal aliens? Does anybody know a number?
It's hard to count. It's in the tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions. I've seen numbers that go anywhere from $15 billion to $150 billion. That's the cost. There is, unlike Kamala Harris, and I know we'll talk about it in a bit, but unlike Kamala Harris yesterday, trying to say, well, there's some benefits, the illegal immigration and her efforts have led to benefits, won't mention and name any benefit because there is none. It's like Nancy Pelosi. We need the illegal aliens because that helps our economy. New York's going bankrupt, Chicago, Boston, UCL, LA. We see all of the about 10, 20 of the top cities in the country, which are all Democrat, are falling apart, infrastructure and becoming bankrupt because of this. It never works. It's not worth it. We know the number should be, if we're being realistic, assuming that New York City, they're costing about between $5 to $10 billion a year for illegal aliens. That's New York City's announced. Every city is smaller than New York City, so scale it down. Let's call it 1/5 that, $1 billion per city. There's another 19 major cities in America that are run by Democrats that are having problems with illegal immigration, where their infrastructure is being destroyed by the inflow of these criminals. Then you're looking at, just using these basic numbers, you're looking at somewhere around $25 billion a year. Minimum.
We sent that in 1 month to the Ukraine.
Oh God, easily, yeah.
So yeah.
And as Agent Black is saying, this is not new. I mean, the policies of the left, whether in America, that would be Democrats and progressives. In the United Kingdom, that would be the Labour Party. You see this in other countries, more socialist, more progressive, but they're all the same thing. We saw this in the European Union. Why is Europe going conservative right? Why are we seeing Germany and Sweden and Italy and so many of these countries are changing their immigration? They're fighting over it in France right now, saying they have to change their immigration policies. They have to close their borders. They have to retain control. We're seeing it already. And the answer is, no matter which country you're in, it's the same answer. Because the left progressive ideology has failed, as it always fails.
Yep. So it may be failing for them that way, but they still manage to generate a lot of money. And in fact, that kind of moves us on to the next topic.
Well, actually, no, hold on a second, because let's skip the money for right now. We will get into that.
Sure.
Harris did have her first interview that she sat down.
Oh yeah,
which was pre-recorded already. What's that?
You want to switch to that already? I thought we were going to save it.
Well, because it kind of ties into the illegal immigration.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, it's got direct ties.
Oh yeah.
Okay. They have literally convinced Democrats to support a candidate that they didn't vote for, that has no established policies whatsoever. I actually watched the CNN interview.
Yeah, I had to see that.
I saw it.
She did not talk about any plans of how she is going to do anything.
No, she has no plan.
Okay.
The only thing I saw was a meme where they actually photoshopped Harris out of the interview, and it was just Dana and Walt.
Mhm.
No,
She was. It was almost like she wasn't there.
no,
She
She was
spoke
there.
most of it.
yeah.
Oh,
he
she
was just
did.
there. Yeah.
Wall was only on about the last 15 minutes of the interview.
Well, he was in on the first and second question. He was meant to be the distraction. If she was in trouble, Walls was the lifeline, and he was the empathy link. He was the one there
If
for
she
the
started up
distraction.
with her word salad, Walls
And-
was going to step in.
Yeah, and other than that, he was there to just see. I'm very empathetic. We're both empathetic. We care about families, So you should vote for us. Complete garbage, complete crap. It
But
was a setup.
again, like I said, okay, he still has yet to come out with any firm plans for any policies. Okay. Yeah, she said that she's going to offer a $25,000 tax credit for first time home buyers, but she hasn't explained how.
Well,
Where's the money coming from? How is she going to do this? Okay. How is she going to get congressional support in order to be able to do this? Because the president doesn't have that authority.
Right.
She
Well, that's
hasn't
no problem.
explained any of that.
because she can't.
Exactly.
And she also doesn't understand, or she doesn't want anyone to think about what are the consequences.
No,
What are
she
the
hasn't.
consequences of just throwing? It brings us back to 1986 with the Democrats putting forth their plan for the housing that banks can't deny and have to put in new programs to create more minority housing. Well, that was great. That created the housing bubble that blew up at the end of the Bush era, at the beginning of Obama's turn. And that was the housing bubble collapse. Why? It's exactly 30 years to the day.
Well, what's going to end up happening, okay, is there will be a $25,000 increase in home prices across the
To
United
absorb
States.
the cost.
Okay, that's the first major thing that's going to happen.
Well, because they know
which
it's
is going to,
guaranteed.
again, basically put everybody at the same place we are now, except people, first time home buyers, will get that 25K, but other people won't. Anybody that's bought a house in the past won't.
And it's the same thing that they did with student loans. Once an institution gets the idea that there's going to be guaranteed money, you immediately increase the price to absorb that extra guaranteed money.
Well, you know who's going to absorb? You know who's going to increase their prices?
Everybody.
No, every single state and city government that charges taxes on those houses.
Well, that's the
Every
next
house
thing.
is now assessed
Okay,
25,000.
now you're going
higher.
to see a huge increase on property taxes.
Yep.
The other thing that you're going to see is rentals will become less and less maintained.
Yeah.
So people that can't afford, even first-time home buyers that can't get to that stage, you're going to see rentals properties become less and less available. And the ones that are on the market that are actually affordable won't be maintained.
Yeah. Because if they make any improvements or they try to maintain the property, their taxes will go up.
Yes, of course they will.
I mean,
Which is what we see already.
Yeah, it's what we see every time you pull, like what Frank was talking about. What was it, 2 weeks ago when he's talking about pulling permits? Every time you pull a permit, you want to do something nice to your house. What happens immediately after? The tax guy shows up and ups your taxes.
Right. Well,
America.
not only that, Michael, you live in New York City. What has rent control done to that city?
Oh, rent control and price fixing has been horrendous for a lot of people. New York City is one of the most expensive places to live in the country. And if I can tell you this,
people that would normally offer rentals in the rent control level can't afford to do so.
Well, it's every time a apartment, as an example, my family's lived in the same place for 50 years. You can't get the rent that we would pay anywhere else in the city because we've been here for 5 decades. It's not possible. They would love, the landlord would, of course, love for us to leave so that he could instantly make over 500% more for the same space. And if he made any improvements to the place, which, things like electrical need an improvement because it hasn't been fixed in 70 years. So, yeah, you fix that, and now he can charge 8 times, an 800% increase in the price just to match market rates. Who can afford that? You can't afford to leave where you are, even though where you are isn't able to maintain the same quality of life. That's a major problem. Young people can't go out and get, I remember when I was in my 20s, I could go out and get an apartment in New York, pretty much anywhere. And I did. I've had a couple apartments, and I've lived in Long Island City. I've lived in Brooklyn. I've lived in Manhattan. I was able to do that. As a 25, 26, 30-year-old, I was able to have a couple of places by myself. Today, you need three people to move into a place because none of you can afford it.
Yep.
So that's one of the things that rent control does. Okay. And when you start doing this quote unquote affordable housing stuff, where government's subsidizing this stuff, you get inferior products at higher cost. It happens. I mean, look at what's happened to our university systems since government's been involved with it.
Yeah, 300% increase in tuitions
since the 1990s. Yes.
And we are turning out people that are less educated and further behind, and charging them exorbitant amounts and putting them into debt that they're now wanting to
foist off on the American taxpayer. Anybody that takes on debt should be happy to be able to pay that debt back if they can afford to. If you're calling on the government to pay or forgive your debts for you at the expense of the American taxpayer, that means that whatever you took out that loan for was never going to pay that loan off. So your gender studies degree, it was worthless. Well, you're a great activist, but you're not going to be productive.
Thomas Sowell has talked about this, okay, when they, in his basic economics book and in a few other books of his, where when they started subsidizing education, you started getting the universities where they no longer competed for their students. Okay, and they were able to raise their tuitions and so forth exorbitantly and provide a product that the quality was declining on. And whenever government gets involved in pretty much anything, you see the same thing happen. They capped insulin at $35, mandated that cap, not negotiated, mandated it.
Yeah.
Now we are seeing a global shortage across the world of insulin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They are talking about doing the same for several other life-saving drugs. Yeah. And we're going to see the same results happen with that. Whenever you artificially cap or price control anything, it doesn't matter what it is, you create a shortage of that because it is artificially controlled in the market. Okay. So the producers of whatever it is don't have the incentive to keep producing that item because they can get higher profits or better cost controls by producing something else.
Yeah,
Okay.
the government
So
makes
as a
it too
result,
expensive.
whenever you do price caps on stuff, you end up with shortages. It throughout history, you can see it. Okay. You see it in New York City with rent control. You see it in other places that have rent controls. Rent control has been a flop. It's well intentioned. Don't get me wrong. It's well intentioned, but the repercussions of those policies has been catastrophic. We're
Most of
seeing the
these,
same thing happen with the insulin cap.
yeah, most of these policies that are introduced that are have good intentions at the start, or at least are designed to look like they have good intentions, but 9 times out of 10, they're going to be extremely detrimental to your individual situation and your ability to freely exercise your inalienable rights. That's why a lot of the times that you see politicians bringing out bills, the names are very innocuous, but what they do once they pass them is an entirely different story. Case in point, the Patriot Act. It sounds really great, but then when you actually read it and you see what its effects have had on the nation, you realize the Patriot Act has nothing to do with being patriots. It has everything to do with granting the government the ability to spy on its own citizens and to basically control dissent within these borders.
Well, the main reason is because politicians don't understand consequences, because they're not held to consequences. They're not held to be accountable, nor do they feel the impact. They don't live like everyone else. They make 4 to 8 times as much as the average person in their state. They live in gated communities, separated, or gated houses with security, separate of anyone else. They are the neo-nobles of the modern age. They don't live the same life. So they don't understand the consequence of their actions and how it ripples through their community. A great example of that is Obama. In 2010, when he was passing his it was his cash, the Obama cash plan.
Is that the
Not
one?
not the cash for clunkers, literally where everyone was getting the cash up front, the stimulus money. And when everyone was getting that, everyone thought, okay, well, this is going to be fantastic. It's going to help everyone. Extra cash. It's kind of like the UBI idea. Except when they did that, they forgot to do the math and realized and didn't write in an exception. So 134,000 families, not individuals, families in America lost their food stamps overnight because this new infusion of cash put them above the federal limit, and so they got cut off. And many states also, that was just the federal limit of their help. There's also many states where they had also exceeded the threshold and they got cut off there. So the number is actually larger than the initial reporting from the Associated Press of 134,000 families.
Yeah.
None of the politicians were paying attention to the consequences of their actions. They didn't think about, but what about families when they gave out all this money? They didn't think, what about the families who are on the line? They're barely getting by and they're getting government aid. Yeah, we just wiped them out. We just pushed them over the limit. They're now going to suffer. And they're in worse position than when they started because politicians don't think about consequences. And almost every single one of those politicians who passed the Obama stimulus are still in elected office now.
Right.
80% of them are still in office as we speak.
Which should tell you something as an American. When they tell you that your vote doesn't matter, it most certainly does, because they wouldn't be spending millions of dollars to tell you your vote doesn't matter. They do not want to be held to account for their actions. And they know that the only way that the people will do that is if they show up at their offices or they call them and bombard them with phone calls, bombard them with correspondence, and vote them out. You, as the voter, have the most power. You don't need a term limit if you have an active voter base. but we need to show up. You need to bring friends along and show up. And if you think for some reason that you're not going to be able to show up on the day, use the tools that are available. Do not be afraid of them. Personally, I want to show up on the day, and I think everyone should. Just make it a national holiday. Everybody shows up. You get a paper ballot, and on that paper ballot, there's a little receipt code. And that receipt code is, you can audit your own ballot by having that receipt code, so that you can tell what you voted for. That would be great, but that's not what we have.
There are some instances where I do believe absentee voting should be allowed. Okay,
Of course.
but those are very, very specific, i.e., military members.
Yep.
Okay, members of the armed services obviously should be able to vote absentee in their states of origin. That's one. Okay. There are certain jobs that require people to be away during election times.
Yeah.
Okay.
My
Those should be
father's is one
allowed
of them.
absentees.
Yeah, my father was one of them, and I think he did vote absentee while we
Now,
were overseas.
and then there are certain people that, because of extreme health conditions, they still have the mental capacity or whatever,
Right, but they're just
to
they're
be
stuck at
able
home.
to vote and so forth,
Yeah.
but they just can't, for whatever reason, make it to the polls. In those cases, I totally agree with absentee voting.
With a very clear chain of custody.
Right.
Absentee voting has a very clear chain of custody. Universal mail-in ballots do not.
Okay. Now, as far as that goes, this early voting, mail-in voting, and all this other stuff that was perpetrated by the COVID shutdown, which has been proven to has been proven ineffective. That should have stopped when COVID stopped. When the COVID shutdown stopped, then all the COVID related rules for voting should have stopped.
Yeah, but you're missing something, Mike. The process, the path towards hyper extended voting periods and mail-in ballots, that was already underway. It's been underway for about a decade, and it's been gaining more and more strength as Democrats keep saying, well, to combat voter apathy, then the only answer is we need to expand the amount of time people need to vote and to expand the ways people vote, in particular mail-in voting.
It's been ineffective.
Well,
as far as
because
voter
it's not the
apathy
root
goes.
problem. The root problem of voter apathy is a lack of consequence and choice. We have horrible choices for most of the candidates, and there's a lack of consequence in those individuals as we do the voting. That's our big problem right now.
Well, another big problem is the majority of Americans think their vote doesn't matter.
Well, that's the lack of consequence.
And one of the things that reinforces that is being disenfranchised over a candidate that was installed rather than primaried in.
Well, yeah. And Black Lives Matter actually raises some great points. And as you know, we are not fans of Black Lives Matter.
No, I'm not. No.
Okay. We are not fans of Black Lives Matter at all. But in this instance, I personally agree with a lot of what Black Lives Matter says.
In reference to, what did they say?
Kamala Harris being nominated.
Oh, there's a lot of people who are upset with, she wasn't nominated, she was anointed.
Right.
And there's a lot of people progressives as
Okay.
well as others that are upset about this.
So, Black Lives Matter demands that the Democratic National Committee immediately host an informal virtual stat primary across the country. Now, this was July 23rd that they released this.
Mhm.
Okay, this was shortly after Biden dropped out of the election. Okay, while Joe Biden wasn't our preferred candidate, we cannot ignore the troubling actions of the Democratic Party. The DNC refused to host debates during the primary, even though a vast majority of Democrat voters wanted them. This would have likely allowed America to see the decline of Joe Biden in 2023. The DNC scheduled the primary, changed its primary schedule, and created rules that made it almost impossible for non-Biden candidates to appear on the ballot, effectively clearing the field of any challengers to the incumbent president.
Yep.
Following the primary, where millions of black voters weighed in, after one poor debate performance, the DNC party, elites, and billionaire donors bullied Joe Biden out of the race.
All true.
Now the Democrat Party elites and billionaire donors are attempting to manipulate black voters by anointing Kamala Harris and an unknown vice president as the new Democratic ticket without a primary vote by the public.
Which they did. Done
This
and done.
blatant disregard for democratic principles is unacceptable. While the potential outcome of a Harris presidency may be historic, the process to achieve it must align with true democratic values. We have no idea where Kamala Harris stands on the issues,
Still don't.
which we've pointed out on this show many times, now that she has assumed Joe Biden's place, and we have no idea of the record of her potential vice president because we don't even know who it is yet. We do know that now. And his record is not stellar.
Yeah.
No.
So BLM was saying the same thing many people were saying. I mean, this is all information we have covered. There have been many groups on the left as well as the center as well as on the right that have all pointed this out. The Democratic Party doesn't care. The DNC, Democrats don't care. They'll say,
But they're the party that's protecting democracy. They're the party that will save democracy.
yeah, they switched their tagline. That's what they were saying then. Their new tagline is, we won't go back. We won't go back to success. We won't go back to prosperity. We won't go back to America being the priority. They won't go back. They are always going to move forward to the left. They're always
They
moving
literally force their hand about saving democracy because they completely went against any democratic processes.
but they never cared about that. It's never been about the democratic process. I mean, they did that to Bernie Sanders. They did that to RFK. They've done it to several people in the past. They've never been about this. This isn't new. They have taglines and their commercials and ads that'll make people feel good in the moment. And their answer to BLM is don't be sexist, don't be racist, don't be Republican. That's their literally, those are the answers to pretty much everyone who questions Kamala Harris is don't be sexist, don't be racist, don't be Republican. That's the way the Democrats answer this. It's not even close to satisfactory because it doesn't answer anything. It's a distraction. It's emotional manipulation. It's meant to obscure the actual root problem that Kamala Harris has no justification for having been put in place.
And now she has been the presumed candidate for
40
well over a month.
40 days as of today.
And we still have absolutely no more clue as to what her policies are going to be. She's made some promises, but she has not given us any indication as to what her policies are.
Or at the very least, how she's going to enact the policies that she has suggested.
Well, I'd start with, give me a policy in writing. See, here's the thing that some people say, but she's having speeches. She just had an interview.
Yeah, but they won't release the transcript for the interview.
No, they did.
They did? Oh, wow.
I covered it yesterday.
Are you sure it's all there?
We presume so, but I'll get to that in 1 second. But here's the problem. Kamala Harris, 40 days. Today is day 40 of her being the presumed and or anointed Democratic nominee. This is her homepage. Again, if anyone doubts that this is most current, I'm refreshing it right in front of everyone's face, and bang. That is the current live 9:51 August 30th response. There is no policy. So anything she said in a speech, the answer is I misspoke. Because that's what we heard yesterday when she was talking with CNN. I misspoke. I was against fracking. Well, I wasn't really against fracking. You just don't understand.
Yeah, remember in 2020, I said that I would not ban fracking.
Which isn't what she said in 2020.
That is actually not true. She didn't say that. Biden said that.
I understand. And she was backing Biden because he bought her as vice president. But again, they're counting on no one's going to fact check. And CNN, who knew better, Dana Bash knew better and should have fact checked her right then and there.
Oh, she did.
Well, she didn't, because when she repeated and said, no, my position hasn't changed. That's not true. That's not accurate. But she didn't call her out. She said, well, but you said something different in 2019. And what was Kamala's answer? Oh, I haven't changed my position. And Dana went on to the next thing, because she wasn't there to do her job, to ask questions of a candidate so the American people are informed. Her job was to silence the opposition to Kamala Harris so that she could win. They were fortifying the 2024 election.
And I have to say, CNN did fact check her on that fracking claim.
I didn't think they did a good job of that. No.
Well, they
pushed back. They did.
Daniel Dell.
Dana Bash did push back a little bit.
Yeah, but Daniel Dell actually did a fact check afterwards and did literally say it was not Harris, it was Biden that said that they wouldn't ban fracking. That Harris actually did say that she was for banning fracking and that she had never came out with a position where she stated she wouldn't ban fracking.
Okay.
But it still wasn't during the interview.
No, that was not during the interview. It was after the interview.
Right. Yeah, and it seems, I think what we're seeing is Kamala Harris is playing hairs and games with the words and the wording, and CNN, Dana Bash, was helping her to be able to have those loopholes and those ways out so that she could say, no, that's just not true. You just don't understand. No, it is true in essence and in form. Kamala Harris is flip-flopping on a lot of issues, of issues that matter.
Okay.
Because she has no core. She doesn't have a actual belief. She believes whatever is being said at the moment. Whatever's going to get her votes, which is why they won't put her policies in writing. Every candidate, Dr. Cornel West, who doesn't have $700 million in donations. He has a website up and he has his policy positions. He had it day one. Jill Stein, who hasn't raised even $1 million on day one with the Green Party, had a website up and had all of her policy positions. The Libertarians, Chase Oliver, day one, actually before day one, didn't have $1 million, still hasn't raised $1 million, had a website up. It has all of his policy positions. Obviously, Trump has had his policy positions up. And Kamala Harris, with $700 million, the full support of the DNC, somehow can't add policy positions to a website that's been up for 40 days. This is either she's the worst leader that has ever existed, she's completely inept, or she is purposefully hiding the facts from the public, because once the policy is there in writing, I can now evaluate it and say, I don't understand how you think you can do that. I think you're wrong. I think it has a bad consequence. She knows the second that she does that, takes an actual stance, she's going to lose voters. And she already has. The Muslim Women for Kamala has already disbanded, and they have already rejected her. They will not vote for her. We're talking about the Dearborn, Michigan vote.
Yeah.
That's already been fractured. It's already not going to go and support her. Even though they came out a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and said, oh, they love Kamala. And now it only took 2 weeks. She already lost that faction because she said, oh, I'm going to maintain America's relationship with Israel. Whether you like that or not, that's up to you. The thing is, she knows the moment she tells people what her actual policies are, once she puts that into an interview with CNN, once she puts that into writing, she no longer is everything for everyone, every hope and dream of the left. And she suddenly becomes, oh, so she's a progressive, and that will screw over the center and the right of America. And she loses votes, which means she can't win. Which, by the way, I don't think, let me correct something I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding on. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz aren't supposed to win. I mean, the Democrats would be happy if they could, and they'll take the win if they get it. She's not supposed to win. They're simply supposed to motivate Democrats and progressives to show up in November, which they weren't motivated to do before, so that the down ballot vote, the votes for Congress, the votes for the Senate, for the legislatures across this country, get to be maintained by Democrats. It's to maintain the power outside of the presidency.
Right.
That's why they made the switch.
And honestly, they were at real risk in highly Democrat states like New York of losing seats in the Assembly and in the Senate. And they were even talking about New York potentially being a presidential battleground state. There were other primarily Democrat states, New Hampshire being one of them, where it was looking like Trump was going to win until Harris got on the ballot. So we're seeing that across the country where it was looking like Democrats were going to be losing seats, not just in the House and in the Senate at the federal level, but in the various legislatures on multiple states where Democrats had power or were trying to gain power.
Yeah. Now I want to address something, because Agent Black, who's in the United Kingdom right now, and he's a great fan, he often comments, and he mentions that he disagreed with me. Let me go back a little bit. So he disagreed with what I was saying, that Democrats don't expect Kamala Harris or Tim Walz to win. They just need them to be motivating voters so they can keep control of Congress and the Senate. And he disagreed. And he says the reason why is because he believes Democrats are aware that if Trump gets in, that he's going to drain the swamp, change America. He's going to go after these individuals in the deep state. And like a wild animal being trapped, they can't afford to lose. They're backed against a wall. I understand the feeling that he has there. I understand why people would feel like that's the situation, but that's not the fact. That's not the reality that we are dealing with. Even if Trump wanted to drain everything, he can't come in and fire 2/3 of Congress, which would be required. Getting rid of everyone who's been there more than 10 years or 20 years. You'd lose 2/3 of Congress. He can't do that. So you can't clear out the Congress. So that means the corruption and institutionalism that's there remains. So you're not going to, no matter what Trump wants to do, he can't. You can't get rid of 2/3 of the individuals in the various departments, like Department of Education, the FDA, the EPA, the ATF. You can't get rid of these individuals. The government would instantly fall apart. We've built it up so much that we require that. We have to scale down over time. Otherwise, the shock to the system would crush everything.
And a single presidential candidacy or term will not do that.
Will not be able
even
to do
2
that.
terms will not do it.
Yeah, you need several
It's
presidents.
generational change. It has to be done.
Absolutely,
and it has to be supported by the culture too.
Exactly.
It can't just be done from the top down. You have to have the will of the people behind you and a mandate of culture.
And that's why we got to start taking control and taking government back for the people,
right,
in our communities first.
Right.
Until that's done, we aren't going to have an impact at the federal,
and that's my
even at
point.
the state level.
Right, and that's my point is that this is why they don't care if they win the presidency. Any one president, that's 4 years. You can survive that. You can weather through that. And you'll, at the end of that, what can you do? Well, what happened when Biden took over for Trump? The first 2 days, he went through roughly 40 executive orders, reversing everything that Trump had done, and then started instituting policies to reverse everything that Trump had done to put things back to where they were under the Obama administration. So you can survive the 4 years. What they can't survive is significantly losing control of the Congress and the Senate. That's why they had to get rid of Biden. That's why they put in Kamala, not just because she has access to the money, but also because she has the irrefutable claim of I'm a woman and and she's a woman of color, which means you're racist or sexist if you don't vote for her. That is a motivation for the youth who have been trained, indoctrinated in colleges that anything they have to support all women, always. They have to support diversity, always, at all costs. And that's what they're doing to maintain their power. It's not about Trump.
I want to comment on what Agent Black here said. Okay, he says, why not? If the NSA has all the incriminating information, same reason why is the same reason why we haven't seen a single person indicted from the Epstein documents.
Yeah, Epstein's one of them. There's a few cases.
Okay. It would be too catastrophic to our country. Unfortunately, we have gotten that corrupt, and the swamp is that deep that a major change and a major shift, like what is being talked about here, would be too devastating to our country.
The only way that you could possibly perpetrate something like that is if you had the entirety of the populace on your side with a culturally motivated mandate to essentially erase the blackboard, clean the erasers, and start over.
You'll never get that in America.
Using the Constitution as the basis. If that's what the culture mandated, then that's what you would see. Is you would see the restoration, which is our goal as the Liberty First Foundation, is to educate everyone to restore the Constitution to its foremost place in our government. It takes a culture to do that. We're not there. It would be too painful. The pain would be
generations
intense.
To get to the point where we are now. And it's going to take generations or a revolution to get us out of the situation that we are in.
It won't be a revolution. People aren't that upset. They're not that hurt. They're not that desperate.
So it's going to take generations in order for us to get it back.
Now, I can see Trump
and
motivating.
The thing is the apathy and the percentage of people that claim that they don't do politics is what's going to prevent a lot of that.
Well, that's slowing it down. And I can see the Trump administration and the success of a Trump administration motivating and promoting a change culturally that leads to greater wins and a reduction in some of the changes that we're talking about, seeing that happen over time. But it's not something that happens overnight. It's a government.
Okay.
Governments don't change overnight.
Agent Black says, you guys are intelligent and see through the bullshit. Your countrymen are the same.
No, they're not.
No, they're not.
They're not.
Okay, considering that Kamala Harris, with absolutely zero policies, has a 1.88% lead over Trump in the national popular vote, says no.
No. There are millions of people, tens of millions of people who do not, literally will say yes to anything if it comes from an authority figure. That there are tens of millions of individuals who vote straight down the line, party line, and we know who they are. They're party line voters. They're about 20% of each party are party line voters. They don't know who's on the ballot. They don't know what the issues are. They know nothing. All they know is this is my party. It's an R or a D, and they vote straight down the line, just that party.
If they vote at all. If they vote at all. As 40% show up at the polls.
Discussions this week about Harris being anointed on several predominantly Democrat pundits. And the amount of pushback that I got from people that were following these individuals was amazing. And when I'd bring up anything about Harris not primarying, Harris not having any type of policies and so forth, they didn't care about that.
No.
Okay. All that mattered to them was she had a D behind her name.
And that's what it takes to win.
That was all that mattered.
Yep.
Nothing else mattered.
Now, Agent Black is right. It is the media, and they do amplify the minority, even though the majority of folks understand that things aren't quite right. But that's not the same as having a nation united under a cultural mandate to preserve itself. We're not there. Individually, each of us here in this space tonight, and those of you that are watching, have probably had how many dozens of discussions over the last 10 years trying to show people.
Been a lot longer than 10 years.
Well, for me, it's been almost 20. But I'm just saying in general, for most people, you've done this for at least a decade, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at least a decade, you've been trying to talk to people, trying to do the research, trying to see through the crap, trying to buck the psyop. And what you ultimately find is that unless people are hurting, like really hurting, they don't care. They won't care. So we may be the majority, but it doesn't matter because the majority will not act unless they are hurting.
Right.
The majority generally don't vote. The majority generally don't take action. It's the minorities that move things forward, whether it's left or right minorities, whether it doesn't matter what the issue is. It doesn't matter. You have 80, there's an old saying, 80% of the population are cattle. And the 20%, 10%, they're off in the woods doing their own thing. And then you've got 10% that are the leadership. That's what leads everyone. It's not that everyone's a leader. It's not that everyone's motivated to have their own agency. You can in America. Most of the world, you can't. But in America, you can. But most people are just like the rest of the world. 80% are just going to do whatever they're told, whatever gets them through the day, because that's what they're comfortable with. They don't want the burden of leadership. They don't want the burden of agency and having to make decisions. They're just going to do whatever they're told. Whatever got them through yesterday is the thing they're going to do tomorrow, because that's all they want. And it's sad, but it's true. It's not that the majority is silent. It's the majority is immobile. They don't move until something forces them to move, which means extremity. You have to have extreme natural disasters move the majority of people. If you have a nation that is falling apart, people are starving, immense poverty to the point of starvation of children en masse, changes things. You see things like that. Rampant violence of governments that have become authoritarian, just randomly killing people. That will do it. Mind you, it's not that, the government became authoritarian, like in Venezuela, and they killed 5,000 people, as reported by the New York Times. That's not enough. If they killed 100,000 of their people, then there would be a revolution in Venezuela. But 5,000, that's not going to move the numbers.
So what I have up here is statistics from Fair Vote. Okay. During the presidential election, 66.7% of eligible voters turned out for the presidential election. Okay. In 2016, it was 60.1%. In 2012, it was 58.6%. Typically, presidential elections run approximately 60%.
Depends on,
and the midterms, it's even worse, generally hovering around 40%.
43. I've done the numbers before in the past. The average, depending on how far back you go, and I've gone back to about 1950, and the number averages out. Presidential elections have averaged about 53%, with any given year being upwards of, we've seen 60% most recently. That's an aberration. The trend most recently has been 47% for a presidential, and we've seen in the off years, anything other than presidential years, we've seen that the trend has been around 38% and decreasing. I mean, it was just a couple of years ago here in New York where we had an off-year election of 23%.
Yeah,
it's been going down since the 1950s. It's a negative slope. It's been going down. The last couple of elections with Obama and then Trump have been the aberration.
Yeah. And share the skin. Okay. So right around here, okay, 1950, we're at 43%. And you can actually see what Michael's talking about. If you look at the trend is a downward slope on both presidential elections and midterms. It's just been the last couple of years where we have actually seen it trending back upwards. Prior to 1900, voter engagement was actually very, very good.
75 to 80% consistently.
And that's because you have to remember,
it was a little lower, but it's still well above 60%.
Oh, well, midterms, yes. I was thinking presidential. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but before then,
is 70 to 80.
Yeah, but in the 1800s, it wasn't that long ago that you had just fought a war to become a country. De Tocqueville, when he was touring the nation after America,
where we really started losing things was when we started getting into the progressiveness.
Right.
Okay. 1896, you can see where we really started dropping off.
But what I was going to say is, at the time, it was so apparent that Americans were involved in their own governance that it was commented on by several foreigners who were touring the nation after it had become a nation, de Tocqueville being one of them. And he said that every public house that he went to, there were no kings, there was no man better than the other, and all could speak to their own governance. That was just a short time afterwards. And as you say, once we hit the progressive era where, you see like 1860s post Reconstruction, that's when you start to see the decline of participation.
Well, you really started seeing the decline after 1896.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's where we saw the really huge drops. Okay, and if you think about that, that was the era of
Well, that would be the era of the New Age thinkers and
right.
the beginning of
You got
eugenics.
FDR in there, you got
Wilson.
Theodore Roosevelt in there, you got
The growth of the Soviet Revolution.
Yeah.
Not the Soviet, the Communist Revolution
right.
in several countries.
Marxism.
Mhm. Yeah.
Developed under
Okay, but
Marxist
you had a
theory.
lot of progressives in this era that won the presidency. Wilson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Storms
and that's
coming.
what really started the decline of voter turnout.
Mhm.
Now, let's compare that to where we are today. The turnout is down. It isn't because, and the reason why we've been seeing this downward slope over time has been because we've had less choices and worse choices. In 1919, there were two third parties that were in Congress that helped to vote along with Republicans to pass the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. Most people don't know that. Most people don't think that third parties existed in America. There were two of them, third party groups elected to Congress that helped to change the amendments.
Yeah.
So, but we don't have that anymore. Now it's considered virtually impossible. RFK was pretty much the last hope of third parties. And much like they changed every rule and regulation after Ross Perot, they're going to change every rule and regulation. And now, once they get past this election, doesn't matter who wins. They're going to change everything that RFK did to get between 5 to 19%, depending on which part of the campaign you look at. They're going to change the rules again to make sure you can't do that again.
Yeah, they're going to follow New York State's example of dissolution of third parties.
Absolutely. And that's the problem. And we're getting less choices when we should be getting more. We're having less interaction when we should have. I mean, we have the internet.
I
There's
also
absolutely
want to
But
bring up one other thing that correlates on this. Okay, I've been reading actually through Audible, going through the books of the Politically Incorrect Guide to the Presidents, and it has given constitutional grades to each of the presidents, A through F.
Mm-hmm.
And at about the same time as we see this slope down of voting, we also started seeing a dramatic increase in the powers that the presidential office has usurped away. Okay. Starting with Grover Cleveland and progressing along those lines.
And I would
worst
posit
ones was Roosevelt. FDR was a huge person for expanding the powers of the presidency.
And I would say that usurpation is only possible because of the abdication of Congress of their responsibilities.
Well, it's not just that. Okay, there's more involved with the expansion of presidential powers. But along those lines, as we go along and we see the presidents of the modern age, okay, prior to 1900, the lowest grade I heard about being rated for any president prior to 1900 was a C+.
No, Jefferson, wasn't it?
No, actually,
no,
it's more
Polk.
current than that.
Probably Polk. But I'm not surprised that yeah, we've had worse presidents in terms of constitutionality with more power because the public is holding them less accountable.
Mm-hmm.
But while that's the trend that's been going, what breaks that trend, what improves America, is calling them out. We have
Yeah.
to get away from, and let's look at what happened with Kamala Harris last night. The first problem I have with what happened last night, and the first thing that tells us we need a change, Kamala Harris, who we all, I think everyone here on the panel agrees, many people, even Democrats, agree, she was anointed. She wasn't elected by anyone. She didn't get a single vote. I've won more primaries than Kamala Harris has, and I've run for 2 offices. And I've gotten closer and done better in primaries than she has. Okay, so that's not a question. But going beyond that, last night she showed up on CNN, a fluff-friendly interview, guaranteed all the way. You saw the intro, that was propaganda to try and prop up her election. The end of the interview, that was propaganda to prop up her election. So this is as friendly an interview she will ever get. She brought Tim Walz with her. There isn't a leader in the world who has run for, or whether it's even when they have sham votes, they never bring their vice president, their number 2 in charge. They sit there in front of the people and go, yeah, I'm the best thing that's ever been since sliced bread. You're going to vote for me anywhere in the world. I don't care whether it's, you can go from Putin to Kim Jong-un, you can go to Chairman Xi, you can go to Justin Trudeau, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron. I don't care where you point to in the world. They do, one person's doing the interview, and that's the leader. Kamala Harris brings Tim Walz. She's weak. First thing and foremost. And that means she shouldn't be president. She can't handle an interview with a friendly news agency that's trying to pump up her election as they go. If she's that weak, she should never have been elected to any office. That's the first problem that we have with it right there.
Yeah.
It gets worse after that. Because then, listen to our answers. Oh my God, they were miserable. We've already talked about the flip-flopping.
Yeah.
But, I mean,
Yeah.
I spent an hour. I did a video. I don't know if you guys saw it, where I was talking about, I'll show it to you.
Let me address one thing real quick
Go ahead.
before we get too far ahead.
Sure.
So Agent Black asked who was giving out the grades. The authors of the books are the ones that gave out the grades for these particular books. And unfortunately, I don't remember the authors' names off the top of my head. But for the most part, I pretty much agree with their assessments from the grades that they've given out. There's a couple that I might have graded a grade lower than what they did, but for the most part, I think they've been pretty accurate.
Okay. So I spent an hour going in detail just on the issue of illegal immigration, where she stands, everything she said, going through the question that was asked and all her responses to it, all the way through. Now, that's something that was maybe about 5 minutes in the interview.
Yeah.
It's an hour
If that.
when you're doing the analysis, when you're actually paying attention to all the words. And I think it's very important that we understand she has no plan. And we need to do something about that. We have a weak individual who has zero plan that is, by her mere existence, by the fact that she's running, she damages the reputation and capability of America going forward.
So Frank's in the chat and he says, sorry, big lightning strike took out my router.
Oh.
So unfortunately, Frank won't be with us. They're going through a pretty big storm there in North Carolina. So unfortunately, in the Charlotte area, Frank won't be with us tonight.
Yeah.
So Agent Black, they actually did comment about how many of the presidents, if you look at the presidential rankings as to who's been the best president, who's been the worst, do not correspond with their constitutional grades. In fact, FDR is considered to be one of the greatest presidents, and FDR gets a constitutional grade of an F.
Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely their governance in their time in office is a reflection of the time that they were in, not necessarily how they stood up against the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as far as FDR is concerned, I can remember there was no speaking ill of President Roosevelt in my family's household, because he eventually ended the war that brought my grandfather home. Okay. Right. But that was parts of policy. That was not how he was with the Constitution.
Okay. Let me just mention some guys. I just got to take care of something here in the house. I'm going to be back in about 15 minutes.
Okay.
And then we'll just pick back up. So maybe we'll put Kamala and the election off on the side, but I'll be right back. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yep.
All right.
Now, getting back to that. Okay. One of the biggest reasons why FDR is rated so poorly is, number one, he wanted to pack the court.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the thing is, he was in office for so long. Okay. 3 terms. He died in office, where he was literally able to pack the court. Every justice is on the Supreme Court, except for one, I think it was appointed by him.
Yeah.
Okay, when he died in office. And a lot of those judges
stayed on for
didn't use
decades.
the Constitution. They used
the Chevron defense.
Yeah. And basically not Chevron doctrine. Social. So what they call social jurisprudence.
Right.
Okay, and they looked at how laws impact people socially instead of.
Have a good night,
appreciate
Agent.
you being here, Agent Black. You have a great night. Thank you very much for joining us. I realize you're in the UK, and you stay safe, and we will see you soon. Get you some rest, bud. So that being said, a lot of people think FDR did such great things. They believe that he was one that was responsible for getting us out of the Great Depression and so forth. And if you actually look at it from an economic and historical perspective, FDR extended the Great Depression
by about 2 years.
By about 7 years.
Oh, it was more.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it would have been allowed to run its course, most economists believe that the Great Depression would have ran its course within 2 to 3 years.
Unfortunately, we wouldn't have the chance to actually.
There would have been some suffering during it and so forth, but the suffering wouldn't have been as bad as what it became with policies under the Great New Deal.
Right.
Many of those policies actually cost people jobs and extended the consequences of the Depression out for 10 years. Okay, so literally took something that should have lasted 2 to 3 years and made it last 10 years before we were able to finally start recovering from it.
Right, stretched it out for a decade. Yeah.
Okay, and in the process of recovering from that, inflation was astronomical. unemployment got catastrophic. Stock market had a hell of a time trying to recover. All the way along, it just seemed like everything that was done backfired.
Yeah.
Literally. He tried to make improvements in one area, and it would cause catastrophic results in another area. And the Supreme Court even tried to fight him on some of this stuff, and that's one of the things that led him to pack the court.
Right.
The NRA deal, the National Recovery Act, the Supreme Court actually ruled it as unconstitutional.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be one of the great things that's supposed to bring us back. Well, the NRA was actually revamped and reintroduced later on, and it ended up being catastrophic. It destroyed tons of jobs.
And just for context for the audience, the NRA or National Recovery Act was basically full of product and price controls and centralized planning for the economy. So everything that you're hearing from Kamala Harris about price controls to prevent price gouging was used before in the NRA. And as we're discussing now, the economic blowback that came from centralized planning and the attempts to control product production and pricing extended the Great Depression well beyond what it should have been. And really, wartime production was the only thing that kept the country grinding forward through that entire period. We don't see prosperity again until after FDR has passed away, Truman takes over, then Eisenhower, and you have the economy kind of free up after the wartime.
Let's be fair. Okay, it did start to recover while FDR was still in office. Remember, he served 10 terms. I mean,
Right.
10 terms, 3 terms.
3 terms. Going on a 4th.
Yes, he would have been reelected if he would have lived. Okay. Let me
see. Here's the thing, though, and the user brings up an interesting comment. He says, "I wish the Communist Control Act was still strictly enforced, including them being named and excluded from the Civil Rights Act. Thanks, Arizona." The thing about the communist controls is that the ideology is so bad. We shouldn't need a law to speak out against it and have it thrown out of the country. We should be able to just rely on educating the populace as to the downsides and the terrible effects that communism has had.
Well, and that's
anywhere that it's tried, that people would not willingly go to it. The problem is that these same people, these communists, that realized that they were being persecuted during the Communist Control Act, they utilized the government's persecution to get themselves elected so that they could go in and censor how you teach communism to people. And so if you dissent, you're scrubbed. The very same tactics that were being used against them to try and curb their encroachment into the United States, they subverted those and turned them back on the very people that we wanted to try and educate so that this never took hold in the first place. And they were very good at it.
Okay. We are supposed to be a free country. And as a free country, freedom of speech, regardless of what that speech is, what that speech entails, means allowing for all viewpoints, regardless of whether we agree or disagree with those viewpoints. Okay? That includes people that want to believe that communism is a good thing, that communism is the best thing since sliced bread, and that's the way we need to go. That voice should be allowed.
Right, Bernie?
Okay. I don't agree with it. I think communism is very ruinous to people, but we are a free society. And if we are going to be a free society, then we have to allow all voices to be free, not just the voices we agree with.
But that also
Okay.
means that they cannot stop us from bringing better ideas to the table
Exactly.
and showing with more speech how piss poor their ideas are. And that's the thing that we see in a lot of these discussions. And I use the word discussions loosely. And yes, I did air quotes. Some people have a problem with that, I guess. But anyway, the point is that those discussions that you have, you must have them. Otherwise, you get a shouting match, which is what we see a lot of times from Marxists and progressives, is that they try to shout down their opponents because they really have nothing of substance with which to uphold their own argument.
Actually, Graham, okay, first off, I want to address user. Okay. I got one parting thought on this. The Communist Control Act served one purpose, and that was to expand government.
Yep.
Okay. Whenever you put any type of control act in effect, the repercussions is an expanded government. Okay. So now to address grain. Okay. And let's go ahead and put that comment up real quick. How would national highways have been built if not for a strong post-depression statist government? The free market would not have been able to coordinate such a large infrastructure project. No. Actually, Graham, it could have.
Toll roads.
It very easily could have if the ICC wasn't in place.
Yeah.
Okay. The ICC actually retarded a lot of our transportation infrastructure because the ICC was trying to keep the railroads solvent. And it actually was a detriment to motorized vehicle transportation. And that's what caused a lot of the retardation in roads being built on a commercial structure. There are actually multiple various ways that you can build out a national highway system through a free market economy. Okay. And one of the biggest things is going to really promote building out a national highway structure is transportation of goods and services. Okay. The people that need the roads are going to build the roads to the places that they need the roads to go to. We were doing it already. We had already been doing it for decades, for generations prior to Eisenhower building the freeway system. Okay. Now, Eisenhower built the freeway system under the National Security Act and as a part of national defense. And if you look at it in that means, yes, that could be a part of strategic defense. Having a good highway infrastructure in order to be able to maneuver defensive components around the nation, military forces, and so forth. I still believe that it could be done, and it was being done very effectively prior to that. Okay, so that's and yes, violence has been used to promote various ideologies. Turnpikes are one means. One of the biggest ones, honestly, is petroleum companies.
Yeah.
Okay, in order to make a larger market for gasoline and so forth, it makes sense to have them build roads. The more roads they have, the more vehicles that are on the road, which means the more gas is consumed, gas and oil is consumed, etc. Okay.
No,
If
and
you look at when the Eisenhower built the interstate system,
yeah,
vehicular transportation was still pretty much in its infancy.
yeah.
It wasn't very old.
I mean, really, you're looking at as early as 1921 when you're talking about the Federal Highway Act. That's when government really gets involved.
Mm-hmm.
Anything before that, people were coming together in the forms of corporations, like the Turnpike corporations. That there was a big section of our history. The federal government was never involved. The federal government had to be outward facing. They were outward facing, foreign facing. States would be involved in making roads, which is one of the reasons why North and South had such a problem with trade, because their travel standards were different, right? So the federal government didn't clear the pathways to build highways. It was all these turnpike companies. It originally was private. It was a privatized, or it was a crowd-funded, if you would. That's probably a better way to put it. Roads and infrastructure in this country were crowdfunded.
Roads that the interstate system and the federal highway system operate on were trails and roads that were already existing.
Yeah. They were built by private individuals.
The federal government just went in and basically took it over, did some infrastructure projects on it, maybe improved it a little bit. But for the most part, it was already stuff that was already established.
I mean, 1792 is the first time that a government entity put crushed stone over top of a dirt trail, and that was called a road. Like that was first government involvement, and that I think was the postal road, which is something that is discussed in the Constitution.
The Pony Express route, was privatized initially. Yep. The federal government ended up taking it over. But initially, it started off as a private entity. The railroads, until government involvement, the railroads were doing great. Once federal government got involved, then we see rail infrastructure declining.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems that we have now is because everybody expects for government to maintain these roads and so forth. Our road infrastructure is deteriorating severely.
Yeah.
Because the money's not getting put into it.
There's money being spent for it, but it's not actually making it to the road for repairs.
If we had it privatized,
where it goes, nobody knows.
Government involvement, you will see a slowing down of progress.
Yeah. A company town. I'm not sure if there's a term for it, but a company town like Avon.
There was mining towns. There was forestry towns. There was factory towns and so forth that were literally built by businesses.
Yeah. Avon I think it's Ohio. Avon, there's a town named Avon after the company that does makeup and shampoos and toiletries and all that stuff. That is a corporate town. The corporation, Avon Corporation, built the schools. The Avon Corporation runs the hospitals. It runs the main distribution, and some of the factories, I believe, for their brands are there as well. And it runs on a similar model as the Endicott-Johnson model, which was instituted here in New York, where you have a corporate town, right? Endicott and Johnson started the shoe factory here, and they had hospitals for their workers. They built roads for their workers. They built houses for their workers. It's private companies, because companies are built of people. Private individuals can come together and pool their resources for the things that they need and build these things. it doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it certainly doesn't need government to instigate it to be built.
Now,
That's how private companies do it, is they bring people together, they bring their trade in, that brings money along with hard resources and wealth, and they're able to, and as long as they efficiently utilize those things, they can build whatever they want, unless there's government involvement, in which case then you're starting to see regulations that will actually inhibit people from expansion or being able to develop or innovate.
Scotia, California, started off as a logging town. Okay.
That's a
It is
beautiful
now a company town.
Hmm.
It is self-governing and so forth. It was started in the 1880s, and it is a true company town. And to this day, it is a company town.
Yeah.
A lot of company towns, and this is actually a solution to the housing crisis too. A lot of company towns would go into an area, build homes for their employees,
Yeah.
and then allow their employees, oftentimes at reduced rates, to buy the houses that they lived in.
Right.
And as long as you maintain good standing with the company, and as long as you were maintaining good standing with paying for your house, at the end of the terms, you would own that house. And then
Yeah.
regardless afterwards, you could either stay or you could go on the house. That's how it was done. And that's how a lot of the housing crisis, how initial housing was done, was by companies building the houses for their employees, putting their employees in. Their employees would then, if they decide that they wanted to enter agreement with the company to buy the house, they would. Otherwise, they would not have to pay rent. That was considered a part of their salary. Okay. Farm, a lot of agricultural companies are doing that now as well, where they provide for the farmhands, they provide housing for them.
Yeah.
Okay, as part of their compensation.
Which is no different than what they used to do in the West during the territory days, when they had hands live on site for their work.
Now, Graham also says, should government enforce regulations like those that maintain operational safety? Again, okay.
At the federal level?
Well, in one area doesn't necessarily work well in another area.
I wouldn't say at the federal level.
Okay. Honestly, the best person to ensure your safety and security is yourself.
And if you wanted to scale that up, I would say
Okay.
your community.
Now, if you want, actually, along those lines, if you have a company, an entity that is doing harm to large amounts of people, then you get those people together and all of them go against that company in filing lawsuits and etc. The thing is that you have to do it as a group. You can't do it individually. That's the problem that we have in this country. How we won the Revolutionary War was we became a united front against the British. We couldn't do it as individual states.
Right.
Okay, but we could do it as a united group of states. Okay, which in turn also united with France in particular to do so. Okay, government actually takes more away from people than it gives back to people. That is the natural state of government.
Yeah. No, I would say certainly at a federal level, you don't want to do that. Have them regulate for operational safety. Now, an excellent example of this would be IBM and Endicott. So, for people that don't know, IBM, International Business Machines, used to be in Endicott, New York. Well, in the 1970s, at some point, some of the excess chemicals got loose into the water table under Endicott, New York. It didn't really come to light until, what would you say, Mike? Probably the early 2000s,
Yeah.
roughly. It was like the early
Yeah.
2000s.
Mhm.
Up until that point, there were regulations out the yin yang for EPA. Like there were, there was lots of state and federal mandates for companies like IBM for safe handling of their chemicals, and they all failed. It wasn't until the city of Endicott actually stood up and took IBM to court as a group that there was any solution done, because people at the
Here,
state and federal level can't monitor every single corporation that has to abide by the regulations. They can
here's
try,
where I can see
but
a
they don't.
role of government, and kind of along the lines of what user is alluding to. Okay. And it isn't so much in creating regulations. Okay. And while we think that regulations protect people, it actually doesn't. Oftentimes, regulations ends up hurting people, and it ends up making unfair advantages for large corporations while making it extremely hard for competition to be established in various industries. Where I see government helping with people is in bringing class action lawsuits against organizations that create widespread harm.
Yeah. The Palestine,
That is
Ohio.
where they actually protect people. That's where they actually protect the rights of people.
Yeah.
Okay. When they start enacting regulations, they start deteriorating rights.
And the free
But
exercise
when they
of
stand
them.
up to large entities where, as a single person, you can't go up against a large entity, but as a group, you can. I can see government taking on that role and filing suits to bring accountability in the court system, not through regulatory practices.
As far as the derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, that Trump regulation, the one that he ended up rolling back from the Obama era, had nothing to do with the failure that occurred at East Palestine.
And
that particular regulation would not have prevented East Palestine from happening.
And let's look into that. Okay, let's say that there was absolutely zero regulations on railroads. Okay, and something as catastrophic as East Palestine happens. The government, instead of enacting regulations to try to prevent that from happening again, should be filing suit against these corporations. These corporations know that they can be held accountable financially for harm that they do. They will police themselves.
Yeah. Especially if they know that they're going to get hit for a lot.
Regulations end up with too many loopholes. Okay. Yeah. Where courts can adjudicate based on individual cases, based on individual circumstances. Okay. Regulation can't plan for every contingency.
And regulations
courts can react to every contingency.
Right. Regulations can also draw out the process to the point where any kind of remedy that you would be getting from it would be untimely.
Mm-hmm. So that's okay. And like we spoke about insulin night.
Yeah.
Okay. And another Okay, again, that is one of the biggest things that. What was that? There's a weight loss drug that was out on the market. It's very, very damaging to people.
Ozempic.
No,
Oh.
there's back early 2000s.
Oh, was it that one that was like a legalized form of speed?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. I know which one you're talking about. I
Okay.
had a friend of mine that nearly OD'd on the stuff.
The FDA approved that drug.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was fen-phen. The
I'm not sure
FDA
what it's
approved that drug. Okay, it met all the regulations. It was still an extreme hazard. What eventually got that drug pulled off the market was the lawsuits.
Yeah.
Okay, what really has the biggest impact on any of these types of things is the threat of lawsuits.
That was Bush.
Regulatory action, like I said, there's too many loopholes because there is not anybody that can see into the future to understand every potential ramification that something can have. Nobody can do it. Okay, there is no way to regulate against unknowns.
And the farther removed from the people that you get in terms of reaction time, so the farther up you go in the governmental ladder, the longer it takes for any kind of remedy to happen. Because governments move slowly. They're supposed to. Because you're supposed to be able to move your local government to react to your needs as fast as possible because you live there. State government reacts a little bit faster than the federal government, but still reacts slower and usually not as such an individual level to be good for every area. So it's a broader regional solution, and then the federal government's supposed to be completely outward facing, only dealing domestically with disputes between states and disputes over borders. Anything else, really, the federal government should not be involved regulating anything domestically. It should all be up to the states and the counties and like your local communities.
The only thing the federal government should be doing on a national level is making sure that everybody is playing fairly with everybody.
Now, Graham picks up on the oil spills in the Gulf. International waters and waterways outside of our borders is something entirely different. That is something that actually does fall under the purview of the federal government.
Law, and that is a federal jurisdiction.
Right. The only groups in this country that we were supposed to maintain militarily are the Navy and the Marines. Anything else was supposed to be very temporary and was supposed to be covered by the militia. That's us. That's you. That's me. That's Marshall. That's Voss. There was no army. The standing army was only supposed to be government funded for 2 years at max, and then they were to determine whether they should let everybody go home or not. The only two branches that were supposed to be permanent were ones that dealt with waterways. So for the Navy and the Marines, to protect our ships. Because everybody knows, well, you're supposed to know, don't touch America's ships. We love our boats. They're ours.
Don't
leave them alone.
touch the boats.
That's right. Hezbollah, I'm looking at you. Houthis, I'm looking at you. Don't touch our boats. So with the cleanup in the Gulf, and that I believe was under Bush, the BP petroleum spill, was that Obama?
No. If I'm remembering correctly, he's talking about in 2010. If it's the oil spill in the Gulf, that's under Obama.
Okay.
And if he's talking about the Exxon Valdez, that was 89.
That's way earlier.
That would be 89. That would be Clinton.
Which one was the BP one? There was a BP spill in the Gulf. Was that 2010 or was that later?
No,
Or was that
no,
earlier?
that was earlier.
It was like what, 80, 89,
Now, there's
87?
been multiple ones, and
There's a few, but
In any case, the point of his question was, what about them? What about the government going out and cleaning up the spill? That would be under their purview. To answer your question, Graham, yes, that is under the federal purview, and that's something
it
the
is
government
under the
should
federal
do.
purview. But they also end up charging that back to the corporation that had the accident.
Correct. So the American taxpayer is not paying for the cleanup
theoretically, but that would fall.
theoretically.
That could fall under national emergency because it's a threat to our waterways, to fishing. It's a
Well,
threat
actually,
to
if you
beach
look in the
lines.
Constitution, there is nothing in the Constitution that accounts for national emergencies.
No, but we're
Not
dealing. There's the Constitution, and there's modern politics. Modern politics, when we have national disasters.
Well, the thing is, we got to look. If we're going to do this, like I said, we are a constitutional restoration. That's what we advocate for.
Right.
Okay, and if we're advocating for that, I understand what modern politics is.
Right.
Okay, and I get that, and I understand that's where.
Well, I'm
we're
catching
at.
up to the conversation, so I'm not sure where we're at.
All right. So right now
Okay,
we're at the
But if we're looking
constitutionality
at
of
this from
federal
a
regulation.
constitutional lens, the federal government actually has no authority in cases of national emergency. It has authority in cases of national defense, but it has no authority for national emergency.
Which
Because
loosely
technically there is no such thing as a national emergency. There is no such thing as an emergency that affects every state of the union at the same time.
Right.
Not every state, but in the case of an oil spill, as an example, you're talking about something that
affects a certain amount of
multiple
coastal
states.
states.
Yeah.
It does not affect every state.
No.
So it's not a national emergency. It's a regional emergency.
Fair point.
Right, but that you could say that loosely, a thing like an oil spill that has catastrophic consequences for a region of the country could fall under national defense.
Constitution didn't have an Air Force or a Space Force. It had armed forces.
Yes.
Okay. It had military. It had a standing army. Standing army would include the Army, the Air Force, and the Space Force.
Yep. It was, which amendment was that?
What? For the Army?
Yeah, the Army was what?
Oh, I don't remember.
Because it was added. They were arguing over whether they should even have the standing army or not.
Well, that's the reason why we have amendments. And that's why, Jefferson was saying we need to have a living document, which I don't agree with in most aspects, but that's why we have amendments, because things change over time. Technology changed.
And thing is we have the mechanism inside of the Constitution that allows for us to make changes to the Constitution as needed.
Yeah.
And as agreed upon by a major majority of the states.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, the way they do it now is completely unconstitutional. And by that, I mean, when they try to utilize the different branches of government to legislate where they don't belong, or even the parts of the government that are not controlled by the people, like the bureaucrats. How many times have we seen these bureaucracies overreach with regulations and their interpretation of such, beyond what their original scope was meant to be by Congress?
Okay, and to give people reference, you're talking about specifically things like the ATF, the FDA, the EPA, even the Department of Education, where they're creating regulations that are de facto laws that no one has approved. Congress has never approved it. They just say so, and so therefore it is. And I absolutely am against that. That's even the Supreme Court most recently shut that down and said, or struck that down, to bring it back to the Congress that if you want to do this as an agency of the government, you still need Congress to make the law first.
Right.
Then you can enforce that, which is what these agencies are supposed to do. Enforce and not exercise. not interpret and create their own legislation. So we do need that change. And I think that's very important. And I do see that movement. I think more people are getting that because as we're seeing in a lot of the conversations with third parties in this election, we're seeing even with Trump in this election, people are talking about defunding different agencies, in particular Department of Education. That's a big one. And many people have been talking about some of the other agencies like the ATF and EPA and such, getting them defunded. Because I think that's really absolutely necessary, especially Department of Education. Got to get rid of it.
And that's really the biggest way to get our grievances redressed and alter the function of our government is through funding. That's how it was meant to be. Like you send your representatives to Congress who have control of the purse strings, and as they draw up a budget, you say, I want this, but I don't want that. So money gets taken from there, resources get taken from this one thing, and they get put towards something that's more important for the country. As agreed upon by the representatives. But it's rarely happened that way, right?
What's
how it's
really
supposed to work
is most people that are elected to office get reelected because they are able to get federal money brought back to their states.
Yeah.
Well, that's because we have allowed the system to become more corrupt. And in that corruption, we have had more abuse because that's what that is. The Department of Education, EPA, ATF, they're abusive.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the proper checks and balances on them. But that's why there's one of the big battles right now in 2024 in particular and going forward is between a big government, and these are Democrats, predominantly progressive movement, left-leaning movement, where they want more government because they see the government as both a means of power but also as being somehow smarter than the individuals that make up the government. I don't understand that. And I think, and we've run this experiment now, and I look at it as an experiment. It's often referred to as an experiment for these agencies for decades now, and we've seen that they failed. I think we should be encouraging and following along. Trump has it correct. I think the third parties have it correct. The problem is the establishment in shrinking the government. The reason why the government doesn't shrink is because the system is built on having a bigger, more powerful. There's more corruption. Yeah. You shrink the government, you cut off avenues of corruption. And the establishment thrive on that corruption. This is the swamp. When people are talking about the swamp, I don't think most people realize what they're talking about. The swamp is having a very large, institutionally corrupt government. And that's what we need to shrink. And because of unions, because of this promise of free money, because that's what it is. The grants, these states are free money. These gifts are what allow that corruption to keep going because it's more comfortable than the pain that would occur in shrinking it down and saying, okay, there is no Department of Education. States have to deal with it. Well, that's a pain and that's a problem. And we have to shift people out of the government into the states to deal with education, and we'll wind up realizing we don't need most of them, kind of like with X. 75% of the people there, they didn't need.
Yeah.
We don't need all these people in the government. Most of them are just passing paperwork.
Or if you want another example, look at what's happening in Argentina with all the government workers.
Well, Argentina is too early to tell. That's really a big experiment. It seems to be working.
I hope so.
Still too early. Still too early.
I hope to see good results from that.
I think it's going to be mixed. No matter what happens, I think it's going to be mixed, but I think it's going to be mostly positive. It will be the example that we can, in the modern age, because a lot of people say, well, you can't shrink government. These are the same people that say that money doesn't matter. You just print money forever. And I think that ideology.
I'm going to pop up a couple things here.
Yep.
Okay. Now, these are the websites for a member of the Senate. Okay. So, Elizabeth Warren, United States Senator for Massachusetts.
I don't see a Rolling Rock.
That's an old picture of her.
Now, go down here. She's got little things that are basically her, her issues.
Hmm.
Okay. But here's what I want to bring attention to. Services. Help with the federal agency. Return to repayment guide. Visiting DC tours. Flag requests. Job openings. Internships. Academy nominations. Special recognition. Grants. Small businesses. Meeting requests. Veteran services and military families. Fiscal year 2025 National Defense Authorization Act requests. Congressionally directed spending federal funding requests. Okay. So essentially funding requests. Okay. But you really don't see anything about talking about legislation.
Yeah, because she doesn't care. She gets her legislation from the party, which gets it from special interest groups.
Well, what's
Now,
under legislation?
We have
that's
somebody
there?
on the opposite side of the aisle and the opposite house.
Well, she's got a legislation tab there. What's it say?
No, that's for
Look at their
legislation she's
services.
promoted.
It's not up. You haven't switched the page over yet, Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
All right, there's Thomas Massey.
Thomas Massey, services, congressional art competition, U.S. Service Academy nominations, flags, tours and tickets, help with the federal agency, internships, accommodations and greetings, additional services and resources. Literally the same thing. Both opposite sides of the office. The biggest thing here, this is what they are. Help with a federal agency.
Yeah.
That's their biggest thing right now.
Yeah.
Okay. The thing is that shouldn't be the way it is. Because we shouldn't have so many federal agencies. They have insulated themselves so that they are no longer accountable.
Right.
Yeah, but the answer to that is people have to vote and make themselves and make these individuals accountable. We need to lower the re-election rate from 88%.
But the next person in office is going to do the same thing.
Not necessarily. If we're electing new people with the understanding, then not only is there going to be, say, a term limit as an example, but also with the understanding that we want to shrink the government, that gets rid of that. If we stop saying throw money at the problem, which we have become addicted to, that's the answer to everything.
But too many people believe government is the answer to all of our problems.
They're taught that in many of the schools and colleges. Again, that's the indoctrination that goes back to Department of Education.
You missed a lot of our chat on this and why we got into this.
I have, yes.
Okay. So, and a lot of it started off with Graham Cabrera.
Graham, yeah,
Was the federal government necessary for clearing, about how would national highways have been built if not for a strong post-depression statist government? Free market would not have been able to coordinate such large infrastructure projects.
Sure could.
Okay, and that's what we told them, and we got into a discussion in chat about federal government regulations and so forth. Okay, and that's what's led to this bureaucracy that has greatly insulated our elected representatives from accountability. Okay, because they can always say, well, that's not my fault. It's fault of such and such agency.
But they've also made themselves the go-between between the bureaucracy and the representative.
Mhm.
So, and that,
So that puts them on good footing with their constituents because they solve, quote unquote, solve problems.
right. And what Mike is saying is that what Voss is saying is if we were able to, as a people, bring our representatives back into accountability using our vote and be like, look, you piss us off, we're going to punish you by voting you out, and we'll put somebody else in that's going to do the job. And if they piss us off, we'll vote them out. And we'll keep trying this until we get somebody in there to do what we needed to do.
The thing is
Yes.
they aren't running the government anymore.
But this is how we get it back. I understand
The
there is
way
a
we
lot.
get it back is by getting rid of the bureaucracy that is running the government,
That's shrinking the government.
because
This the
that is
process.
what insulates the representatives.
Yeah, but that's shrinking the government. We have to elect people who shrink the government. That gets rid of the bureaucracy. Which gets
Okay,
rid of the corruption.
and like User and Graham were literally talking about having the government solve problems. User here, and I'm not picking on you guys. Okay, I'm using you guys examples as what was in chat. Because Graham, not Graham, User. Okay, I wish User had this comment. I wish the Communist Control Act was still strictly enforced, including them being named and excluded from civil rights. Thanks, Arizona. And
That's
I said, okay, that is looking for government to solve a problem.
It's extreme.
Okay, and I said, what we got out of the Communist Control Act was an expansion of government.
So you both of you guys agree on the problem. It's how we're fixing it. You both are going at the same problem from two different angles, but you're not able to agree and correlate the actions of the two of them together. We need to do both. We need to lower the bureaucracy. We need to lower the
That is very true.
unaccountability of the representatives. But you can't separate the two of them because they insulate one from the other, from the rest of the populace.
Right.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
So you can attack through the way of the representatives. So hear me out. So you go for the representative, right? And you're trying to vote somebody responsible into the position. Even if you get a representative that's responsible to the people, accountable to the people, to lower the government, and you get enough of them in there that they try to do this, the bureaucracy will still find a way to insulate itself from being restricted.
I disagree.
I
disagree.
But how would they do that without a majority? See, that's what I'm saying. Is you've got to. The two of them rely on each other, but so closely.
Not quite, no, because it always starts from the representatives. It's the representatives that give the power to the agencies. It's the representatives that enable, by legislation or lack of legislation, by funding or lack of funding, enable the bureaucracy to maintain itself. And because they have been very comfortable in that, and because they've become very close due to corruption, that's why we see this problem consistently. If we retain control of the elected officials, and we have the elected officials focused on shrinking the size of the government, which is in fact shrinking the bureaucracy and the avenues of corruption,
I can see that.
Then we effectively remove that self-sustaining nature of it. If
But
we
as
just
long as we
remove
have
it,
populace that believes government is the solution to our problems, that will never happen.
that's a different part. See, I agree with you in that the populace has to agree that they are accountable, that they are the solution. Ultimately, that's what our country is about. That's what makes us different than everyone else. We are accountable. We have agency without any government interference, without interference of anyone else. We are the agents of our lives. We've given that up because they've made it comfortable. But the cost of that comfort is what we have right now, which is, some would say, and depending on which group you want to look at, it's economic slavery or wage theft or racism and sexism, depending on which side you want to point. There's a lot of ways people are labeling it, but it all effectively is we've given up our accountability, our individuality, and we have to take that back on with the pain that comes with it.
Yeah.
And that allows us to make the votes to make the change. That's the string of dominoes that I see that allows us to get there. Because otherwise, you're right. If we do it anything other than that, you run into a roadblock that says, okay, can't go any further.
Right. Okay. And that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately where, and one of the reasons why our Constitution starts off, we the people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Is we the people, and I've said this many, many times, it's hard to have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people without the people being involved.
You can't. And there is no greater example of that than, and I don't know where you guys have been in the conversation while I was gone. There is no greater example of that than Kamala Harris right now.
Right.
This is the most, I know we always hear, this is the most important election that we've ever been through. We always hear that. No.
Well, every election's our most important election.
Well, yeah, but they always say it. And there's a certain level of validity to it. But here's the thing. This is the most dangerous election that we've seen in this nation easily in my 56 years of life. And I'd say probably since the 1860s, when we were dealing with the Civil War, when we literally broke into two different nations. Not because of slavery, but because we broke the nation itself. That's why it's so significant. Because what we are looking at right now is a precedent. We have a candidate for the first time ever that I am aware of who has no policy, has no position, has no stated goal, no way to evaluate or to objectively rank or evaluate her presidency. Kamala has nothing. There is nothing objective up until last night, and that was a series of dodges. She just dodged almost every single question. She committed to nothing. She gave nothing of substance in that entire interview. And I know lots of people have feelings, and that's the danger. The feeling, which is always temporary, they felt great because it sounds good, but there was no substance. It's 0 calories. This is pure sugar that she was pouring out last night. And she's dangerous because if she, God forbid, it doesn't even matter if she wins. If she does well, the next person down the line. I've seen many pundits. I've seen many analysts, political analysts, political commentators, and consultants, and they've all said the same thing. And I agree with them. Kamala Harris, the best thing she can do, say nothing. Duplicate what we saw in 2020 with Joe Biden. Stay in a basement, find an excuse, and don't talk to the American people if you at all can. Have as little interaction with the public in terms of anything that is documented, anything that is concrete. That means don't talk to the press, don't put anything on the website.
And here is one of the biggest things, and one of the reasons why this is one of the biggest threats is because we don't know her position or so forth. That is one of the easiest ways for a dictator to actually get themselves established.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that this is
because we have no way of evaluating them before they get into office.
Exactly. And
except by the track record for whatever the office they held before. I mean, if you look at her, you'd have to go back through her time as an AG, right? So
which she is highly corrupt,
right,
and very much authoritarian.
So that doesn't speak well to her. That actually shows her to be a sociopathic psychopath. So
Yeah, but you're forgetting that's been whitewashed. They've been rewriting her, revisioning her past.
How very communist of them.
Yeah. And this is why I say this is dangerous. They're setting
Right.
up the precedent so that in the future, there will be even less. I mean, we're down to
Yeah.
she's not even having the three traditional, we've come down to three debates for a presidency. That's the standard nowadays. And now we're shrinking that down to maybe one for a candidate. I don't care if Joe Biden had one. That doesn't count. That's not Kamala. Kamala's here. She should have three. Joe Biden should have had three. She should have three. We're maybe going to get one. This is a dangerous precedent.
And that's up in the air.
Yeah.
Exactly. And if this continues, if she does well, that is the impetus for the next election where people go, well, we're going to put less out there because that'll give us more opportunity. Because people will look at these candidates as empty suits. They'll put their hopes and dreams, they'll put their feelings into these people, saying, they look like me, they're in the party like me, maybe they think like me, because they haven't said anything that makes me sure that they don't. So I'll jump on in with both legs. I'll make the donation. I'll rally my friends. I'll make the vote. Fewer people will vote, but when those who do vote will count more because there's less of them. And now we have fewer and fewer people involved in the process. That brings us to an oligarchy, which brings us to a dictatorship. It's the dominoes fall quickly in that path.
Yeah.
Once it starts. We absolutely, people should be so adamant in not supporting Kamala until she's willing to tell them what she stands for. This is the biggest crime against America. I truly believe this in decades because of what it means.
Yeah.
You cannot
here's
run
what
for something and have no
thing
pace.
is. Okay. And one of the things that I believe that every member of the Democrats and every person that supports the Democrats should be absolutely fuming right now with the DNC. Okay. And primarily because they knew that Joe was compromised.
Knew it in 2020.
Okay. And I'm not talking compromised as corrupt or any of that. I'm talking compromised
medically.
as far as his capacity. Okay. They knew this. They knew this long ago. The signs have been there all throughout his presidency. And the thing is, they tried feeding us lies and so forth. And that's one of the reasons why he was doing so poor in the polls. Wasn't because of his positions or anything like that. It was because people didn't believe he could do the job anymore.
Yeah.
Still can't. He should have 25th Amendment. He should be out. I don't care if it helps Kamala. He should be gone.
Okay.
The fact that he's on Rehoboth Beach right now instead of actually working, the guy's old. No, and that's the thing is, I don't fault him for being on Rehoboth Beach. I fault him for still being president. He needs to be gone.
Yes.
If he can't run,
they knew early on.
Yeah.
And we discussed this shortly after Biden was elected.
Yep.
We had discussions about and had predictions that he would be 25th Amendment or he would step down prior to the end of his term.
I think Ross's was the earliest.
Kamala would be put in. Okay. We predicted that it'd happen shortly after the midterms.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the latest, but you can't get rid of the presumptive leader and the presumptive candidate.
And the thing is
easily.
Honestly, the reason why Biden was doing so poorly in the polls was because people didn't believe he could do the job anymore.
True.
And the Democratic Party as a whole did a huge disservice to the people that support them by allowing him to run for a second term. He could have easily said at any time that he was not going to run for a second term.
He would never have said that. He had to be forced into it, and it took extreme pressure.
The problem thing is Democrats could have done that long ago.
Yes, they should have. They should have.
Mm-hmm.
But
they didn't. Ultimately, they didn't. And now we have this shit show going on, for lack of a better term. So we just have to deal with what we have at the moment. But the best way forward is to spread this message. Liberty is here. We have it in our hands, and we can maintain it if we choose to. And the way you do that is by spreading this message out. Bless you.
Excuse me.
Gesundheit.
And on, like I said, if you're a Democrat or a person that supports Democrats, you should be just fuming mad. Okay, you can support Harris all you want, but you should be so pissed at the DNC right now.
No. Don't.
That is a choice of theirs.
Yes, it's a choice, but don't do it.
Okay.
Either way, they should be demanding better of their party.
That is a choice of theirs. But the thing is, they should be so pissed at the Democrat Party for doing what they did.
Demand better. Demand better.
You have to demand better.
And the thing is,
stupid way to vote.
Is I honestly believe that if the same thing would have happened in the Republican Party, we would have seen the same thing play out.
I don't want it in any party. Again,
I don't want it either.
This is why I'm saying it's dangerous. It's a precedent. It will, I guarantee you, it will happen. If she does anywhere above 10%, which is almost impossible not to, it will be the process that we see again, unless there's an immense backlash over the next month. We are going to see candidates do that in 2028. You're going to see that in the midterm elections in 2026.
Very soon you will see candidates literally running on no platforms.
Yes.
Or dead guys. You can either vote for the one living guy that's probably, going to ruin your life, but then there's this dead guy you can vote for too if you want.
Well, that's a little further down the line, and that's exactly how the Soviet elections used to be.
I mean, either way, the point is that unless the voter, the American populace, wants to keep a populist in governance so that they rule in accordance with our wishes as the people, the neocons, the neolibs, whatever you want to call them, the authoritarians are just going to recycle the same playbook over and over and expect you to comply and be governable by it.
Yeah, but this is our wake-up call. And this has been the most traumatic election we have ever seen in America.
It's been crazy.
That is the definition, or that is the indicator of a sea change event.
Yes.
This is why I'm saying it's the most dangerous election, not the most important, the most dangerous election in American history since at least the Civil War, when we split the nation, because the ramifications of what we are doing right now will last decades. It puts us on a path that is almost impossible to get off of without severe changes, and could end the nation.
And lots of pain.
Massive amounts of pain. I don't care who wins. It's going to be massively devastating to everyone. It changes everything about America, fundamentally.
And that's why we are so adamant that the people start taking accountability and start being involved.
Yeah.
Okay, regardless of what side you are on.
Yeah, I'm not telling people you shouldn't be supporting Kamala, because in this instance, I'm not talking about because I'm a Republican, she's a Democrat. No. It's because she has no policy. She has no substance. There is nothing to evaluate.
And that's the message I've literally, when I was having those discussions, this week on various like Democrat pundit sites who was just playing her up as the greatest thing since sliced bread. The thing is, how do you know?
No.
How do you know?
You can't.
You can't know. The polls right now are so full of static that you really can't see any use in them. I mean, they're all right for a quick temperature glance, but they're not going to be accurate to any degree. They haven't been
Okay.
polling her for months.
You have absolutely no clue about where she stands.
Media is not going to tell you
Okay.
either.
You
They
can
don't know.
believe all you want that she supports the Democrat Party, but you don't know.
And most people haven't seen things like the speech yesterday. Almost no one saw that live. It was behind a paywall. I had to
Yeah.
wait until after it got out the paywall so I could watch I was watching someone covering it, but they were talking into it. And then I had to go back, wait for CNN to finally post it up.
And they posted it in 3 parts.
I know. And then I had to watch that to see the whole thing to finally get to know what she was talking about. Most people didn't do that. Most people don't even know that they could do that. And I was reading the transcript before I actually could even see what she was saying to see how she said it, which is why I know there was a transcript. But most people don't even know that was out there. Like you didn't know, Dal.
No, I didn't know.
You're a political junkie. You're more informed than 90% of the population. And I knew. So
last I heard that they hadn't released the transcript yet because they weren't finishing editing the video.
And
pretty much. And that's the problem. And this is why this is so, again, and we should have people talking about this and share it with your friends. This is the most dangerous election.
That this nation is built on opposing viewpoints and so forth. Okay, we need that. We need those challenges.
We do.
Okay, we need that. We need our people challenging each other, okay, as to their positions, because that's the only way we can truly build a greater nation. Is each side saying, hey, I believe this. No, I believe this. Here's why I believe this. Well, I see that as wrong. So, and then eventually we can come together. But with the way that these parties have been pushing us and dividing us, we can't do that anymore. And then when we do bring up stuff like this, oh, it's just because you're a Trumper.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
No, there will be disagreements, but the thing about populism, like the idea of civic national populism that used to be the homogenizing glue that held this country together, was the fact that you could take people from disparate groups that have different ethnicities, different ethnic cultures, but there is one fundamental thing that they all agreed on. That the most important thing were the unalienable rights of every individual and the value of their life in that free exercise of those rights. We don't have that anymore. Everything is through a collectivist lens. Now, there is one thing true with the communists, and I don't agree with them all the time, but on this I do. Life is about struggle. Now, what the communists want to do with the struggle is they want you to browbeat and struggle with your opponents until they comply and submit. On the other hand, the person with the liberty first principles wants to struggle because they know that is the best way forward to make a better path for themselves. You want to struggle because in struggle there is growth. You don't want to submit, but you want to grow. So there's two different opposing views. We need that, but we should never submit to it. To that struggle being the only thing. We need to grow, not submit.
Okay, folks. We've been going for over 2.5 hours. There's so much more that we could talk about on this.
Yeah, we kind of deviated from the actual list, which is fine. But
you do take time to think about what's really going on. Quit looking at whether or not they've got a D or an R behind their name and look at what's really going on. Start getting involved, because the only ones that can change this is us.
Mhm.
We, the people.
We are our own greatest advocates.
Yep.
Don't look at the national issues just from as a national issue. Look at yourself.
Mhm.
Every time you go to the grocery store, you pull out your receipt. What do you see? Every time you go to fill up your gas tank, what do you see? Every time that you get a utility bill for your water, for your electricity, what do you see? How are things that are the representatives that you've sent to your legislatures, state and federal, even your local community, how have they helped you? Have they not?
Right now, Congress has one of the worst approval ratings ever. And that's because we are no longer evolved.
We
So,
shouldn't
folks,
allow them. Yeah.
let's get back involved with our own governance. Join groups like the Liberty First Foundation, the Cato Institute, the 10th Amendment Center. There are pro-constitutional groups that are both left and right. Okay? It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you are on. You can be pro-Constitution.
Yep.
We've got to get back to our constitutional foundations. Otherwise, we are going to lose this country. We're going to lose our self-governance.
Yep.
Okay? Get involved. Graham, thank you very much. We do appreciate having you in the chat. And
Sure.
thank you for pushing us on our positions.
Yep.
We appreciate that probably more than anything else, because it allows us to actually explain why we think the way we do.
Yep.
Okay.
Shout out to
This
Graham.
is going to be
user.
our last Friday night live stream, regular live stream. We're changing days and time. So we are going to be moving to every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So please join us then. Okay. One of the things that we are hoping to do, and this is where you can really help us, is we're trying to increase our audience. Okay. We're trying to get this word out, this message out. Okay. We need to be involved. And the only way to do that is for us to do the work to be involved.
Yep.
Okay. Politics affects every one of you. Regardless of whether you think it does or doesn't, it does. Okay. You see it in the prices. You see it in the gas tank. You see it everywhere. So be involved. We will see you starting September 4th. That's this Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And we'll be on every Wednesday night after that, 7 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to everybody in the chat that offered comments and so forth. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Help us get the word out. Talk to us about your friend. Talk about us to your friends.
See, that's so
Okay.
late. We're tongue tied now.
Yeah. We'll see you Wednesday night. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, folks.
Night.